what we've spoken about this whole time is individualization, right? That these strategies are only as effective for each particular kid, right? Based on who they are, what they like, what they're doing. Um, but what we spoke about in our first workshop together is that there is this one group of children who are systematically different from maybe their peers who otherwise fall under this umbrella of having disruptive behavior problems. And we have done some work on trying to figure out what tweaks we can make to our behavior modification strategies for this particular subgroup of kids. So just as a quick reminder, we have the big circle of kids who have these conduct problems, disruptive behaviors, but then we also have these kids who have the limited prosocial emotions. These are the kids who don't necessarily feel guilty after they do something wrong, don't seem to connect emotionally with others, don't feel that empathy, don't feel, they don't, after they see someone hurt and they sort of, there's nothing going on there emotionally for them. They don't really care about doing well in things, school, homework, sport, and they can sometimes use their emotions as a bit of an on-off switch. The emotions either don't seem real or they don't last as long as we would expect them to last. So once again, this is about, 25 to 50% of kids who have disruptive behavior problems also struggle with their conscience, their moral emotions, their prosocial emotions. The reason why I'm circling back to this is because we have accumulating science that tells us that these kids don't respond as well or as consistently to our standard behavior management strategies as other kids. And we see this both at home, so with parents, but also increasingly, this has become something we've looked at in school settings, in classrooms. For these kids, I see have treated so many of these kids, and it's they confound teachers. And teachers like, I have tried everything. These are the conversations I have with teachers where it's like, I've tried everything and nothing seems to stick. And often these kids are not all of that likable. I sometimes think about kids, the other type of kids being sort of the naughty but nice kids, where they do the wrong thing, but they're pretty, they're cute, or they say funny things, or there's a degree of likability, whereas not all kids have that, right? And so we're going to talk about 3 strategies to use for this type of kid if you suspect that they do struggle with their moral emotions. So the first one we're going to talk about, we want to try and make consequences consistent, and we want to emphasize up the rewards. We're going to talk about strengthening the student-educator relationship, and the last thing we'll talk about is addressing their emotional skills deficits. So first things first, you have already seen this. So this is the model that I gave to you about how we learn how to have a conscience. This is one theory about how we learn how to have moral emotions. It starts when we're really young, preschool, teeny tiny, when we first start developing agency and independent movement and all of that stuff. We might do something to another child, we might bite them. What tends to happen is that our victim shows distress of some kind, they get upset, they get scared. Our environment also tells us in some way we've done the wrong thing, whether that is a parent or a teacher, looking angry, looking concerned, telling us no, getting really close to us. And what happens over time is that this gives us negative feelings. And as we just keep doing things like this, those negative feelings start to become guilt or empathy, which stops us from doing these things in the first place, because we are conditioned, we have learnt to associate doing those types of transgressions with feeling bad, with feeling negatively, having negative emotions. That's where we feel guilt, that's where we feel empathy. But what we spoke about for children who have these limited prosocial emotions is that something goes awry in this process. And one of the things that goes awry is that these kids tend to have less sensitivity to punishment. So they don't learn as well from punishment. They don't get as affected by punishment physically. And so sort of summarizing those sorts of findings in a school setting, this is one of the sort of most consistent things that teachers tell us when we ask them about these children who have these limited prosocial emotions, is that they're just less sensitive to punishment strategies. And I'm using punishment as this sort of broad term, discipline, consequences, providing some sort of negative feedback about a particular behavior. And it seems to be particularly so when that punishment is harsh. So if it involves yelling or scolding, or really getting in trouble, these kids just tend to be less sensitive to that. They tend to care less. And that trying to put punishment or discipline strategies to implement them is really difficult, because these kids are often the most aggressive, the most disrespectful, and or the most uncaring. They don't care. We just recently, our research studies that we do with the kids who do PCIT, we video record the sessions, and we just went back and looked at all of the sessions in which we've gotten parents to do a timeout, and we looked at how the kids responded. And these kids tended to respond with more neutral, more calm, more uncaring, sort of emotional behavior than any of the other kids that we have in our research clinics. So it's quite disconcerting when you see when kids usually get quite distressed over, which is what we want, not them to be distressed, but to have some sort of reaction, because then they'll be motivated to avoid it. These kids are, I don't care, put me in timeout, I don't care, doesn't bother me, I'm unbothered, right? So it's harder to implement discipline when you're not seeing the reaction that you expect, or when the kids really escalate up in their behavior. And what we have learned is that this idea of kids not being sensitive to consequences may underline two things. So underlie the conflict that we see in the student-teacher relationships, as well as their poor academic achievement as well. So this punishment insensitivity is pretty meaningful, it's pretty important in the school context. So the take-home message here being that your discipline attempts may be harder to implement and may change behavior less effectively for these types of kids, which is not to say that you shouldn't do consequences with them. Absolutely, consequences are necessary. What I would say is that the consequences have to be so consistent and so predictable and regularly implemented, because it takes these kids a lot longer to learn from punishment. It's not that they can't learn from punishment, they're so insensitive that it just doesn't work, they just don't learn at all. It just takes them a lot longer, which makes sense. If you feel less affected by it, it's going to take you a lot more learning trials to make that link between, if I do something, this annoying thing happens, rather than this thing that makes me feel really upset or really scared or really whatever it is. So that's what I would say. Don't eliminate consequences, but it's recognizing that it's going to take them a lot longer to learn from than other kids probably. But on the flip side, we do have some evidence that they're very driven by rewards. We spoke about this, that they're very motivated. Their behavior is very motivated by the prospect of getting something that they want, whether that is, it can be a reward being broadly defined, as we spoke about in the section before. What we think, and this is the science on this is less developed, I would say, than the punishment stuff. But what we think at this point is that these kids are probably going to be more motivated by rewards that are things, so tangible rewards, as opposed to social rewards, so things like praise. Unless the praise is about them being the best or being sort of having social status, that sort of praise seems to be quite effective for these kids as well. So things, tangible things, or praise that gives them social status. And what we know is that when we look at how often teachers give rewards to children over time, when kids have these limited prosocial emotions, we see a real reduction in the number of rewards that teachers give them, which makes a lot of sense. We don't tend to sort of, if we have a strained relationship with a child, if they're often really disruptive, they're going to be receiving fewer rewards. But this is a problem because rewards is a key way that these kids learn and how we can shift their behaviors. So it means that reward giving has to be really intentional, and we have to do it even if we feel like we don't want to, because we don't really think this kid deserves it, or we don't like this kid, or whatever it is. It has to be really intentional. And unlike reward systems for other kids, where having a surprise reward can be so exciting and be so motivating, and that keeps their behavior going a lot longer when they sort of don't know where the reward is coming, when the reward is coming. For these kids, it seems that the reward systems also have to be very consistent. They have to know what I what I need to do to get a reward, how much I need to do it, and what the reward is, and it needs to sort of happen the same every time. That seems to be what they learn the best from. So, for a small anecdote, when I was working with a kid who had limited prosocial emotions, I had to individualize the rewards. I got permission from his mum to include his favorite like lollies in the reward box, but I had to let him look in the reward box before we started doing our session together, so he could pre-select his reward and he knew what he was working towards. So he didn't take it at the time. He still had to do the work to earn it, but it's almost as if he needed to know what the parameters were to be motivated to do that. It wasn't the surprise, wasn't the thing. So keep that in mind as well. I guess jumping off that point, then I thought I'd circle back to this, is the idea of a token economy system. So I use token economy systems a lot. I think they can be really helpful for like all kids. The dojo point is an example of a universal token economy system where you get a token, a dojo point, for instances of behaviors, which then you can usually trade in for something else. I think in your case, maybe the merit system, a certain number of dojo points makes you eligible for X, Y, and Z merit. Same sort of thing. I think they can be effective across all kids. For these kids with limited prosocial emotions, though, they can be super effective, and they can be the thing that shifts the child's behavior so much more than a consequence, like a level system sort of thing. So I guess the key to this, I've listed a couple of things here. We want to give tokens regularly and consistently for pre-specified target behaviors. So really figuring out, like we did with the home school report system, what are the behavior goals? Really clearly defined behavioral goals. And every time a kid does that, it's like, oh, you've got a token for that. You just did your quick listening. You've got a token for that. Oh, I just saw you say sorry, or I just saw you offer help. You get a token for that. Whatever the behavior goals are, we want to sort of make it rain tokens, particularly initially. For these kids, I wouldn't remove tokens for misbehavior. It's just inconsistent with that idea that punishment is going to be less effective, and they may not be earning tokens all that regularly at first, and so we don't want them to go into a deficit and be unmotivated. So the types of behaviors, like I said, compliance, prosocial behaviors, saying sorry, being kind, being caring, what does that actually look like? And then positive opposite behaviors for being aggressive. In terms of, so the token economy system, you have tokens. So I will often use poker chips, feels wrong, but you can get a lot of them and they're cheap. Poker chips or stickers as the actual tokens. You immediately, like each time you see instances of these behaviors, oh, you get a token for doing your quick listening, or if it's compliance. Child is obviously collecting tokens. We want them to be able to trade those tokens in for something. So I will work with parents to set up a reward list. And this is where that home school 1-2 punch can be really effective. Kids can earn tokens at school for things that they can trade in for on their home reward list. Or we can have on the reward list school-based rewards as well, because lots of kids like that sort of stuff. I will often have a menu of rewards of small, medium, and large things that cost different amounts of tokens. Teaches a good lesson, delayed gratification, etc. And the rewards are often updated. So this is where it comes back to that proneness to boredom thing. Kids lose motivation. These kids lose motivation quite quickly relative to other children. I mean, I think all kids do. Their interests obviously change over time. But if you start seeing a decrease of, I don't care about earning tokens, I don't want a token, I don't want to do it, I don't care. That's my first clue to say, oh, I think the reward list needs to be updated because the season has changed. We want it to be achievable and given regularly. The bar is low, I think, initially. And yeah, rewards can be really anything. And I often work with parents to get quite creative. Is it a makeover? Is it, picking the takeaway for the night? At school, is it walking, being the leader, walking first at the front of the library line? Yeah, things that that the kids like and want more. So that's that. That's the first thing. We want to make consequences as consistent as possible. We still want to use them, but we also want to really turn the dial up on rewards. Now, the student-teacher relationship is a big one, and we want to strengthen this. And we've spoken a lot about this already in terms of the pride skills. That was the rationale for that. But I want to come back and emphasize it again here, because the science is really clear on this, that of all the students that you work with, when we get teachers to rate how close they feel to those students or how much conflict there is in the relationship with their students, these are the children that have the least closeness and the most conflict out of sort of, when we ask teachers, out of everyone. And that may or may not be consistent with your personal experience, but on average, when we put all teachers' responses together, that seems to be what we find. So that's a problem, because we know how important the student-teacher relationship is. It's so protective for kids. When kids have a good student-teacher relationship, or when the dyad has a good relationship, kids tend to have better academic outcomes, social outcomes, behavioral outcomes. It's really protective, and it predicts a lot of outcomes as well. So what I guess the take-home message for this one is that if we can harness that positive attention and some of those skills we spoke about in the last workshop we did to enhance that student-teacher relationship, you will see the benefits pay off later. Like you'll see the improvement in the academics, the social, and the behavioral outcomes. We've traced these kids over time, and we see those relationships between those variables. So it's very important, I guess. But then, like the ultimate challenge being that these kids will often reject. They're often really hard to get to know. They're often really hard to be around. And so once again, it has to be this really deliberate attempt to build up the relationship. And so that's when I would bring in these practical strategies of the potentially doing this sort of one-on-one child-led style play that we practiced in our first workshop. This is sort of, we're bringing it back, we're closing the loop on that. And that is high effort, and there's a time cost and there's an energy cost. But I think I said this in that workshop, there is a real potential benefit that the effort you put into doing that in those moments will pay off for you in terms of what you have to deal with this kid in the long term, but also that this kid in the long-termness of their own life having a really healthy relationship with an authority figure, because it might not happen with their parents, is going to be really protective for them. We actually see a reduction in those limited prosocial emotions over time. They get more prosocial, they get more moral when they have that healthy attachment relationship with their authority figures. So think about when these kids are getting your emotion-rich attention. Is it most often when they're disruptive? How can we make that more neutral and more calm? And how can we provide more of it when they're behaving appropriately? Because even these kids, there will be a percentage of time when the behavior is appropriate. And how can we go in then and be deliberate with our emotion-rich attention, with our voice, with our facial expression, with our touch and our proximity? And if possible, if feasible, can we do this sort of one-on-one style play, use our pride skills to strengthen that relationship? And I do this a lot when the teachers participate in PCIT. We do these we do this coaching with the student and the teacher, where the teacher is actively there's no learning, there's no teaching, it's just playing, and the goal is to just learn to like this kid, and vice versa, this kid to learn to trust and to like the teacher. And I've seen it's been beautiful to watch, really gorgeous relationships develop. So I'll leave that one there because we've already spoke about that quite a bit. And this is the last thing we'll talk about. So if you allow me just a couple more minutes, and then we're done. Their emotional skills deficits. This is probably, I think I said this before, one of the most robust things that we know about these kids is that they do not respond to how we would expect to other people's distress. And so we come back to our model. I bite. What usually happens is that my victim becomes distressed in some way. They cry, they get upset, they get scared, and that doesn't make me feel good. But if you are not very good at recognizing emotions or paying attention to emotions, that's not going to have an impact on you. And that's what we find, that these kids, if we tell them to look at two faces and tell us what the emotion is, they are much worse at accurately recognizing when someone is feeling sad, when someone is feeling scared. And this is not just their faces, it's body posture. I think you see a silhouette of a person with a sad, like you can tell from their body posture what they're feeling, as well as their tone of voice. So we get kids to listen to someone saying something in a sad voice, a scared voice, a happy voice, and they're reliably not as good as other kids at saying, oh, that person's feeling scared, or that person's feeling scared or sad. And what we think is that because at least with the facial expressions, they're not looking at the right part of the face. So we can track people's eyes, and typical people tend to focus on the eyes and the mouth. So all of the little green dots of where they've looked are all around the mouth and the eyes, whereas these kids have green dots sort of all over the face. They're not looking at the place that gives us clues about how someone's feeling. We also know that they're less likely to have their attention captured by somebody who's in distress. Chair, photo of a hurt cat, chair just as engaging as the hurt cat, for example. And their bodies react less to distressing stimuli. See a video of a car crash, for example, much less heart rate change, much less sweating response, and see this in their brains as well. So their brains light up differently. So this is a bit of a review for what we've already done, but it's really robust finding. And so when we think about practical strategies, this is where the emotional literacy stuff comes into play much. I mean, this is important for all kids, emotional literacy. But for these children, it's really important to go back to the basic building blocks. Most kids, you can start from a higher baseline. They know what someone who's sad looks like, what someone who's scared looks like. They've nailed that. They know that. So you can sort of start with the more complex stuff. Okay, what are the situations where somebody feels sad or feels scared? You can almost start there. What would you do about it? And they have ideas of what they would do. Whereas these kids don't have those basic building blocks of emotional literacy. And so it's so important that they almost not rote learn, but have to be taught, actively skill build their ability to recognize, for example, when someone feels sad, what does their face do? What do the eyes do? What do the eyebrows do? What does the mouth do? They're called those micro expressions. Most kids will naturally develop this skill, but it needs to be taught for some of these children. And then building up on that, then, okay, what are the situations where you would feel this way? And if you're feeling angry, what do you do about it? Bringing all of that stuff in. But I think the take-home message here is it has to start at the basics. The assumed knowledge is not present, right? And so this is how we might go about doing that. So how do we know that she's feeling sad? We'll break it down, right? Does her nose tell us that she's feeling sad? Does that give us any clues? If we're a feelings detective, nah, it just looks like a nose. It doesn't tell us anything. What about her mouth? Does that give us clues? Yeah, that does give us a big clue. When someone's sad, what does their mouth do? And then it's like learning, coming up with ways of describing this that's meaningful for, a 5, 6, 7-year-old. Well, her corners of her mouth go down, her chin goes right up to her nose, whatever. The mouth looks like an upside down, half a moon or something like that, whatever's going to be meaningful. What about her eyes? What do her eyes do? Well, actually here, what we're interested in is the eyebrows. And sad eyebrows always go up in the middle. They do a little wiggle. They go up in the middle. And they do a little wiggle like that. These are like universal facial expressions, and most people are naturally picking them up, but some people aren't. And so it's actively training kids to look at the right places on the face to figure out what somebody's feeling. And doing that across different types of people, different ages of people, different intensities of feelings, because this is quite an exaggerated one, right? But not everybody's going to look this sad. And so it's picking up on the subtleties. Um, and so I guess the last thing we'll speak about is combining then all of these things. We're working on emotional skills deficits. How do we provide motivation to kids um, to engage in these activities, to try and engage in prosocial behaviors? Well, we have to use things like rewards and attention, and we have to show them how to do it as well. So we're modeling it as well. So I'm going to leave it there, but I just wanted to say thank you so much. You have been such a good group. You've been such a pleasure to work with. I really appreciate it. Thank you.